If Ned Stark and Renly Baratheon had joined forces early in Game of Thrones, the entire War of the Five Kings could have played out very differently. The halls of the Red Keep smelled of smoke and blood. Ned Stark stood tall, despite the weight of betrayal pressing against his chest like a blade. Across from him, Renly Baratheon's sharp blue eyes studied him, waiting for an answer. "You want me to put you on the throne instead of Stannis?" Ned said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to save the realm from the Lannisters," Renly countered. "Joffrey is no king. Stannis is a good man but rigid, uncompromising. You know how this plays out, Lord Stark. We wait, and the Lannisters consolidate power. Or we strike first." Ned hesitated. His honor screamed against such a plan. Stannis was the rightful heir, but honor had already failed him. Honor had led Robert to his death. Honor had left him alone, surrounded by vipers. "How many men do you have?" Ned asked. "Over 100,000, Renly said with a knowing smile. "The might of the Reach, the Stormlands. If we march now, King's Landing falls before Tywin Lannister can react. But I need your support." Ned exhaled. Robb was marching north, risking his life in a war that could be ended before it truly began. If Ned took Renly's offer, they could crush the Lannisters and restore order before the realm burned. For the first time in weeks, clarity settled over him. He had made a mistake trusting Littlefinger. He would not make another. Ned Stark extended his hand. "Then let's end this war before it starts," he said. The weight of the decision settled on Ned Stark's shoulders as Renly clasped his hand. There was no turning back now. Honor had cost him too much, and if he hesitated any longer, his head would be on a spike outside the Red Keep. Renly grinned, sensing victory. "A wise choice, Lord Stark. We must act swiftly. I will summon my forces immediately." "No," Ned interrupted, his voice low but firm. "We must secure King's Landing before word reaches the Lannisters. If they suspect what we're planning, Cersei will burn this city to the ground before surrendering." Renly nodded, his mind already at work. "I can have the city watch on our side by sunrise. Their sellswords at heart, a few sacks of gold, and they'll open the gates for my men." A bitter taste filled Ned's mouth at the mention of the city watch. He had trusted Littlefinger to sway them before, only to be betrayed at the last moment. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. "I want Varys involved," Ned said. "He knows every tunnel, every secret door in the Red Keep. If we want to take the castle without bloodshed, we need his knowledge." Renly raised an eyebrow. "Varys? That slippery spider? You trust him?" "I don't," Ned admitted. "But I trust that he serves the realm, and right now, our goals align." Renly considered that for a moment before nodding. "Then we move tonight." Nightfall came swiftly, draping King's Landing in shadows. The streets were unusually quiet, as if the city itself sensed the storm on the horizon. Ned moved carefully through the halls of the Red Keep, his heart pounding as he approached Varys's chambers. The spymaster was already waiting, seated calmly with his hands folded. "Ah, Lord Stark," Varys said, his voice smooth as silk. "And Lord Renly, an unexpected alliance." "No riddles," Ned growled. "You know why we're here." Varys tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Indeed. And I assume you wish to remove Queen Cersei and her unfortunate son from power?" Renly leaned forward. "Can you help us take the castle?" Varys let out a quiet sigh. "If I had thought Lord Stark capable of such boldness earlier, I might have acted sooner. But yes, I can ensure that the Red Keep's guards are either absent or otherwise occupied." Ned didn't waste time questioning the spymaster's motives. "Then we move now." The attack was swift and brutal. Under the cover of darkness, Renly's forces poured into the city, their banners fluttering like shadows in the wind. The city watch, already swayed by bribes and promises of wealth, offered little resistance. The real battle took place inside the Red Keep. Cersei had grown suspicious in recent days and had doubled the guards around her chambers. When the first sounds of fighting echoed through the halls, she fled with Joffrey, dragging the boy through secret corridors like a cornered beast. Jaime Lannister fought fiercely, cutting down Renly's men with lethal precision. But numbers overwhelmed him. It took 6 men to subdue the Kingslayer, and even then he nearly broke free. By dawn, the Lannister rule had ended. Joffrey Baratheon, the so-called king, was dragged before the Iron Throne, his face twisted with fury. Cersei was nowhere to be found, having vanished in the chaos. Renly stood tall, his blue armor gleaming in the torchlight. "The false king falls tonight," he declared. "The throne belongs to a true Baratheon." Ned Stark watched in silence as Joffrey was forced to kneel. The boy's eyes darted around, searching for someone, anyone, to save him. "Please," Joffrey whimpered. "I'm the king. You can't do this." Renly glanced at Ned. "What say you, Lord Stark? The boy is no king, but he is still a child." Ned met Joffrey's terrified gaze and remembered the day Robert had asked him to protect his children. This was not Robert's child. This was a Lannister through and through. "This is war," Ned said grimly. "And war has consequences." Renly nodded. A single sword stroke ended the reign of Joffrey Baratheon. As his body crumpled to the ground, silence filled the throne room. The game had changed, but the war was far from over. The scent of blood still lingered in the air as Joffrey's lifeless body was dragged from the throne room. A stunned silence filled the chamber, broken only by the distant cries of the city waking to a new ruler. Renly turned to face the gathered lords, his expression unreadable. "The false king is dead, but Westeros still bleeds." His voice rang through the hall, firm and commanding. "The Lannisters will not forget this night. Tywin Lannister will march seeking vengeance. We must be ready." Ned stood by his side, watching the reactions of those present. Some, like Sir Loras Tyrell, nodded in approval. Others, particularly the remaining members of the small council, looked pale with fear. Varys, ever composed, offered a slow nod. "Lord Tywin does not suffer losses lightly. He will retaliate." "We should send a raven to Stannis," Ned suggested. "He has the strongest claim by law." Renly stiffened at that. "Stannis lacks support. You think the lords will rally behind him when I stand before them with the might of the Stormlands and the Reach?" Ned narrowed his eyes. "Your claim is weaker." Renly smirked. "Claims are words. Swords decide the throne." Ned had no love for this game, but he understood the truth in Renly's words. Stannis would never bend the knee, and war with him was inevitable if Renly kept the throne. For now, they had to secure the city. Deep in the dungeons of the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister sat against the cold stone wall, his golden hair matted with sweat and blood. The Kingslayer was stripped of his armor, his hands bound with iron chains. When Ned entered, flanked by guards, Jaime's lips curled into a smirk. "Ah, Lord Stark, come to gloat?" "I take no joy in this," Ned said evenly. Jaime tilted his head. "You've won. Joffrey is dead. My sister is gone. But you know Tywin will not stop until he's burned this city to the ground." Ned studied him. "What do you propose?" Jaime's smirk widened. "Let me go, and I'll convince my father to stand down." Ned laughed bitterly. "You expect me to trust the word of a Kingslayer?" "I expect you to see reason," Jaime shot back. "You think Renly's claim will hold the realm together? The North will never follow him. Stannis will never accept him. You're on the brink of another war." Ned didn't respond. He knew Robb was still fighting in the Riverlands. The North had no love for the Lannisters, but they also had no reason to swear fealty to Renly. Still, letting Jaime go was a risk. "I'll bring this to the council," Ned said finally. Jaime chuckled. "You always were too honorable for your own good." Across the city, hidden in the depths of Flea Bottom, Cersei Lannister stared at the flickering candle before her. Her son was dead. Jaime was imprisoned. The throne was lost. She had barely escaped the castle with the help of a few loyal guards. Now she was a fugitive in the city she once ruled. But Cersei Lannister did not break so easily. The game isn't over, she whispered to herself. It's just begun. Her mind raced. Tywin would come for her, but she had to survive long enough for that moment. She needed allies, power, and revenge. Ned turned without another word, leaving the Kingslayer in the darkness. The sun rose over King's Landing, casting a golden glow on the blood-stained streets. The city belonged to Renly Baratheon now, but the battle for the Iron Throne was far from over. In the throne room, the lords and council members gathered, their voices hushed with uncertainty. Renly, draped in Baratheon gold and black, sat upon the Iron Throne, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Beside him, Ned Stark stood with his usual solemn expression, a stark contrast to Renly's triumphant aura. "The boy king is dead," Renly declared, his voice carrying through the chamber. "The usurpers have fallen, but our war is not yet won." Varys, ever the shadow in the background, stepped forward. "Lord Tywin Lannister will not take this lightly, Your Grace. He commands the strongest army in Westeros." Renly leaned back against the jagged throne, unfazed. "He may have the strongest army, but I have the most loyal. With the Tyrells, the Stormlands, and the North behind me, we will break the Lannisters before they even reach the city." Ned cleared his throat. "The North has not yet sworn fealty." Silence fell over the room. Renly raised an eyebrow. "Your son still fights in the Riverlands, does he not? Would he rather spill blood fighting for a lost cause than accept peace?" Ned's jaw tightened. "Robb fights for justice. He will not kneel unless he believes the cause is just." "Then we must make him believe," Renly said simply. "Send him a raven. Offer him dominion over the North as warden, free from southern interference. Let him keep his crown in all but name." Ned hesitated. Robb had been declared king in Nizhé, the North. Would he surrender that title for peace? Renly studied him and smirked. "Or would you rather see your son fight a war he cannot win?" Ned exhaled through his nose. "I will send the message. But if you break your word, the North will never forget." Renly waved a hand dismissively. "Honor and oaths. You Northerners love such things." His expression darkened. "But make no mistake, this war ends on my terms." At River Run, Robb Stark sat in council with his bannermen. His mother, Catelyn, sat beside him, her face lined with worry. The letter from King's Landing lay open before him, the words heavy with meaning. To Robb Stark, king in the North, Joffrey Baratheon is dead. The Lannisters are beaten. The Iron Throne belongs to a true king. Renly Baratheon offers peace. Swear fealty, and the North shall remain free in all but name. Your lands, your rule, untouched by the South. Your father lives. Choose wisely." Robb clenched his fists. His father was alive. That alone was enough to make his heart pound with uncertainty. "Renly thinks he can buy the North with promises," Rose Bolton muttered. "It is a trick." "We cannot trust a Baratheon," Lord Karstark added. "They are no better than the Lannisters." Catelyn, however, touched Robb's arm gently. "Your father is still alive, Robb. That is worth more than any war." Robb stared at the parchment. The North had declared its independence, yet here was a chance to end the bloodshed and reunite his family. But at what cost? Tywin Lannister's fury was unmatched. The message from King's Landing had arrived, and with it the news of his grandson's death, Joffrey dead, Jaime captured, Cersei missing. Tywin crushed the parchment in his hand. "They will pay," he said coldly. His bannermen sat in silence. Even Kevan Lannister looked uneasy. "Our armies are strong, but we are outnumbered," Kevan admitted. "The Reach and the Stormlands stand behind Renly." Tywin's fingers drummed against the table. "Then we strike where it hurts most." A cruel smile spread across his lips. "The North." The hall at River Run was silent. Every lord present watched Robb Stark, waiting for his decision. The letter from King's Landing lay before him, the ink still fresh. Renly Baratheon offered peace. Ned Stark was alive. Yet something about it felt wrong. "If we kneel," Lord Karstark said, "we break everything we fought for. We declared the North free. To bow now is to dishonor our dead." "More dead will come if we refuse," Catelyn Stark countered, her voice tight with desperation. "Your father still lives, Robb. If there is a way to end this war without losing him—" Rose Bolton's calm voice cut through the tension. "A broken king is no king at all. Renly wears the crown, but for how long? What happens when Stannis marches on him, or when Tywin strikes?" His pale eyes settled on Robb. "We should wait. See who bleeds most. Then choose our next move." Robbie exhaled sharply. "If I agree to this, Renly keeps the throne, but the North rules itself. No southern interference, no taxes, no lords from the Reach governing our affairs." "That is what he claims," Bolton murmured. "And my father?" Robb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catelyn flinched but met her son's gaze. "You could save him." Robb's fingers curled into fists. His father had raised him to be a man of honor, but honor had cost Ned Stark before. Could Robb afford to make the same mistake? Finally he spoke. "Send a raven," he said. "Tell Renly the North will stand beside him." Murmurs spread through the lords, some in relief, others in outrage. The war had changed. The North had bent, but it had not broken. Now they would see if Renly kept his word. The raven had barely taken flight when word came from the west. Tywin Lannister was marching north. The lion had bared its fangs. "He moves to destroy us before we can unite," Rose Bolton observed. "He knows we are at our most vulnerable." Robb gritted his teeth. His armies were still strong, but they were spread thin. If Tywin struck quickly, he could break the North before Renly's forces could reinforce them. "We must make our stand," Robb said. "Where does Tywin march?" "The Twins," came the answer. The room turned cold. Lord Frey still held the bridges. If Tywin reached the Twins first, he could divide the North's forces and crush them before they regrouped. Catelyn's face darkened. "Then we must ensure Frey does not betray us." Bolton gave a ghost of a smile. "Frey is a coward, but cowards can be bought." Robb nodded. "Then we ride for the Twins." The race against the Lannisters had begun. As Robb and his forces rode for the Twins, King's Landing prepared for what came next. Renly Baratheon sat upon the Iron Throne, but unrest simmered beneath the surface. His queen, Margaery Tyrell, walked the halls of the Red Keep, whispering to her father and securing alliances in quiet corners. She knew what Renly did not. His grip on the throne was fragile. Stannis Baratheon had not yet made his move, but he would. He always did. And somewhere in the shadows of Flea Bottom, Cersei Lannister waited. She had no army, no allies, but she had something stronger. Hate. The game was not over. It had only just begun. The cold winds howled over the Twins as Robb Stark and his bannermen arrived at the Frey stronghold. Walder Frey, ancient and sly, sat upon his chair, his beady eyes gleaming with amusement as Robb approached. "So, the young wolf returns," Frey cackled. "And what do you want this time, boy?" Robb clenched his jaw. He hated dealing with Frey, but the old man controlled the crossing, and with Tywin's forces bearing down on them, time was running out. "I come to reaffirm our pact," Robb said carefully. "You swore allegiance to the North. If you keep your word, the North will remember your loyalty." Frey let out a wheezing laugh. "Loyalty? That's a funny thing, coming from a boy who broke his word to me once already." His eyes flickered, toward Catelyn, who stiffened. "You were supposed to marry my daughter. Instead, you took some pretty foreign girl." Robb's face darkened. "I will make amends." "Oh?" Frey leaned forward. "And how exactly will you do that?" Robb took a deep breath. "My uncle, Edmure Tully, will take a Frey bride. House Tully is noble, and the marriage will honor both our houses." Edmure, standing behind Robb, stiffened. Robb cut him off with a glance. There was no other way. Frey hummed in thought. "A Tully, is it?" He smacked his lips. A fine offer, but I want more. Robb's patience thinned. Name your price. Frey's grin widened. After this war, I want River Run. My house has served lesser lords for too long. I want my descendants to rule as the new lords of the Trident. Catelyn gasped. You would ask us to betray my father's house? Frey cackled. That old man will be dead soon enough. His house is crumbling. Why shouldn't mine rise? Robb's mind raced. The price was steep, but if they refused, the North would be trapped, easy prey for the Lannisters. Finally, he spoke. If the Freys hold this bridge and fight for us, River Run will be yours when the war is done. Frey's grin widened. Then, we have a deal. 2 days later, the Lannister banners appeared on the horizon. Thousands of golden lions marched toward the twins, Tywin Lannister at their head. Robb and his men stood upon the ramparts watching the dust rise from the approaching army. They had beaten Tywin once before, but this time the odds were different. The Lannisters had numbers, they had experience, and if Frey had betrayed them, this war would end before nightfall. But the gates of the twins remained shut to the Lannisters. Walder Frey had made his choice. The battle began at dawn. The North fought with fury, the bannermen of House Stark clashing against the hardened knights of the West. Arrows darkened the sky. Steel met steel in the fields outside the twins. Robb Stark, atop his great gray direwolf, Grey Wind, led the charge. The young wolf had learned much from his past battles. He did not seek to simply hold the line. He sought to break Tywin's army. The riverbanks ran red with blood as northern swords carved through Lannister ranks. Then, from the south, banners of gold and green appeared. Renly had arrived. The combined forces of the Reach and Stormlands slammed into Tywin's flank like a crashing wave. The Lannisters, outnumbered and surrounded, fought like demons, but the battle was lost before it had truly begun. As the sun set over the twins, the Lion of House Lannister lay broken. Tywin Lannister was dead. The banners of House Stark, House Baratheon, and House Tyrell flew together over the battlefield. The war, it seemed, was won. Robb Stark stood beside Renly Baratheon, the scent of blood still thick in the air. This is the end of the Lannisters, Renly declared. Their power is broken. Robb, still gripping his bloodied sword, nodded. And what comes next? Renly turned to face him, a knowing smirk on his lips. Now we rule. But even as he spoke, far away in Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon prepared his next move. And deep in the shadows of King's Landing, Cersei Lannister sharpened her claws. The war was over, but the game had just begun. The battlefield outside the twins was silent, save for the moans of the dying. The banners of House Lannister, once proud and unyielding, now lay trampled in the mud, soaked with the blood of their fallen soldiers. Tywin Lannister, the most feared man in Westeros, was dead. His golden armor, now dull with blood, gleamed under the fading light of the sun. As Robb Stark stood over the fallen lion, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion. We have won, said Lord Karstark, his voice thick with satisfaction. Robb looked at him, then at the field littered with the bodies of thousands. At what cost? Across the battlefield, Renly Baratheon's forces were securing the remaining Lannister survivors. Lords swore fealty, while common soldiers surrendered, knowing there was no escape. Jaime Lannister, still shackled in chains, was brought before Renly. You've lost, Renly said, his voice filled with amusement. Do you regret fighting for your family, Kingslayer? Jaime smirked, but there was no humor in his eyes. Do you regret stealing the throne? Renly's smile faded. He looked at Jaime for a moment, then turned to his guards. Take him to King's Landing. We will decide his fate there. Jaime was dragged away, but his golden head remained high. Whatever came next, while Westeros bled, another force was stirring across the narrow sea. Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the deck of a ship, her silver hair whipping in the wind. Behind her 3 dragons roared, their cries echoing across the waves. She had waited long enough. Westeros was weak, divided, bleeding from within. It was time to take back her birthright. Sir Jorah Mormont stepped beside her. "King's Landing is vulnerable. If we strike now—" "No," Daenerys interrupted. "We do not strike like thieves in the night. We make them see our power. We make them fear the return of House Targaryen." Jorah nodded. "Then we sail. For Westeros." Daenerys's violet eyes burned with determination. The dragon had awakened. The war was over, but Robb Stark found no peace. Though Tywin Lannister was dead and Renly sat the throne, the North was still wary. The wounds of war ran deep. The Freys had been appeased, but Robb knew they could not be trusted. Roose Bolton had fought for him, but his cold, calculating nature was unsettling. And then there was the matter of Winterfell. Word had finally reached him. Theon Greyjoy had betrayed the Starks. He had taken Winterfell and killed Bran and Rickon. The rage that burned in Robb's chest was unlike anything he had felt before. "We march home," he told his bannermen. Catelyn Stark reached for his arm. "Robb, the war is over." "No," Robb said, his voice dark and filled with fury. "Not until I take back Winterfell." The North remembered, and it would have its vengeance. In the halls of the Red Keep, Olenna Tyrell sipped her tea, watching, as Renly held court. The young king was confident, but Olenna saw the truth. He was a man who had won a throne but had no idea how to rule. "You have a problem," she said, her voice smooth as silk. Renly looked up. "And what problem is that? Stannis still lives. The North does not trust you. And Daenerys Targaryen is coming." Renly scoffed. "The Targaryen girl is across the sea." Olenna smiled. "For now." Margaery stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "We must be ready, my love. We must be stronger than those who would take the throne from us." Renly hesitated, then nodded. "Then we prepare." But as Olenna watched, she knew Renly's days were numbered. The game was not over. It had only just begun. Far to the south, a different kind of war was brewing. On the stormy shores of Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stood beside Melisandre, watching the flames dance in the night. "The usurper sits the throne," she whispered. "But not for long." Stannis clenched his jaw. His brother had stolen the throne that was rightfully his. But kings were made in fire and blood. "The Lord of Light has shown me the path," Melisandre continued. "With one sacrifice, the Iron Throne will be yours." Stannis turned away, his face unreadable. Would he trade his soul for a crown, or would he fall as so many had before him? The waves of Blackwater Bay were calm. Then, without warning, fire erupted across the sky. The first dragon Westeros had seen in over a century soared above King's Landing, its mighty roar shaking the city to its core. Panic spread through the streets. People screamed. Soldiers dropped their weapons in terror. Atop the Red Keep, Renly Baratheon stood frozen in shock. "She's here," Margaery whispered. Daenerys Targaryen had arrived, and with her, fire and blood. The war was supposed to be over. But it had only just begun. The North had its vengeance, but the price was heavy. The South played its deadly game, with Renly ruling while Stannis lurked in the shadows. And now the dragon had returned, ready to reclaim her birthright. The realm was shattered, and soon it would burn. Ned and Renly's alliance changed everything. The war ended faster, but Westeros remained a battlefield of ambition and betrayal. With Tywin dead, Robb victorious, and Daenerys landing in Westeros much sooner, the game had taken a different turn, one filled with even greater uncertainty. And in the shadows, a Lannister still lived. Cersei had disappeared into the darkness, and the lioness was not done hunting.